Six, welcome back to history. We'll pick up where we left off yesterday as we move through the agricultural revolution um, and how people adapt to their environments. Yesterday we talked about domesticating animals, about the agricultural revolution where we learned how to settle down and farm. Might have been the biggest event in history because population could explode. As population explodes, we're going to talk about what happens when we have a population. That's going to be today's part of the lesson on why this is such a big deal. We ended yesterday talking about a couple of the cities. One was Jericho from the Bible, talking about its big, huge, thick walls. The other one was what we call Catalahayuk, where we have this little digging up of evidence from them. And today we'll move on and we'll talk about agricultural revolution and how it leads to civilizations and what the civilization will give us that we can then turn around and start studying civilizations as we get our way through that. Okay, so I'm continuing on in your history books. If you had your book on your desk, we left off halfway through page 66, the benefits of a settled life. Let's get going with them. Neolithic people needed protection from the weather and wild animals. A settled life provided greater security. Steady food supplies created healthier growing populations. As the population increased, more workers became available. Those individuals could grow more crops. Villagers produced more food than they could eat, so they began to, boom, your notes, trade their food for supplies they could not produce themselves. This is huge. I'll take another paragraph to explain it to you. Because an abundant amount of food was produced, fewer people were needed in the fields. Neolithic people began to take part in economic activities other than farming. Specialization occurred for the first time. People took up specific jobs as their talents allowed. Some people became artisans or skilled workers. They made weapons and jewelry that they traded with neighboring communities. People made pottery from clay to store grain and food. They made baskets from plant fibers. They also used plant fibers to weave cloth. Otzi, the Neolithic Iceman, wore a cape made from woven grass fibers. These craftspeople, like farmers, also exchanged the goods they produced for other things they did not have. Okay, so over here, guys, specialization occurred for the first time. People took up specific jobs as their talents allowed. Artisans, potters, craftspeople, farmers, you have those things. So they talk about Otzi, guys. This is what they think he looked like and what they believe they found him frozen in a glacier wearing this woven cloth. Okay, guys, what they're getting at is this is, we'll just pretend in the classroom. I'm a farmer, but I'm so good at farming that I can produce enough food to feed the whole class. Well, that means all of you don't need to be farmers anymore. So you're saying, hey, I can buy the crops from Bauer. What else am I going to do? So one of you says, I'll make arrowheads. The next one of you says, I'll make hand axes. The next one says, I'll make baskets. The next one says, I'll build homes. The next one says, I'll make bricks for city walls. The next one says, I'll weave cloth. I'll make jewelry. I'll make. And so that's what you guys start to do. And we start to work together and say, sweet, I need a basket to store my food in. I'll give you some of my food. You give me a basket. I'll give you some of my food. You give me some arrowheads. And we started to work together, guys. That goes to last chapter, bartering and trading and economies that happen. Now, why can this stuff happen? Making all these other things? Because of food. If I can make enough food for other people and we can start having more and more kids, then other people can work on other things and we're going to improve the way of life. The roles of men and women changed when people moved into settlements. Men worked in the fields to farm and herd animals. They gradually became more responsible for growing food and protecting the village. Therefore, men emerged as family and community leaders. Women bore the children and stayed in the villages. They wove cloth using the wool from their sheep. They also used bone needles to make clothing from cloth and animal skins. In addition, women managed food supplies and performed other tasks. So guys, you're kind of getting this difference of men and women. Take that in stride. Remember, one of our jobs in history is to read history and not put on today's perspective of it. A lot of us read that like, women can do that stuff too. Yes, that's very true, okay? Don't get worked up about that. Just understand that women did the physical labors in the field. Why? Well, that's natural. Men have more muscle. Women took care of the children. Why? It's natural. Women are more caring and nurturing. So we play to our strengths, guys, is literally what it is. It did that in the Bible. It does that in the history book. Okay. The growth of communities did not always bring benefits. In some places, such as settlements in present-day Jordan, rapid population growth caused resources such as wood supplies to be used up quickly. On occasion, this loss of forestation caused desert-like conditions to spread. Where this type of ecological damage occurred, many settlements were abandoned. Okay, so rapid population growth could cause us to use up things. In other words, hey, we're going to build houses out of trees, and we just start sawing down trees like crazy, and we use them all up because all of a sudden there's a huge population, and didn't think, hey, we need to replant trees. And so, guys, that can happen and have a devastating impact as people learned, hey, we can't just saw down all the trees. We'll have to chop down one tree and get a different tree so that we slowly use up resources and grow new ones. So problems happened. Without a doubt, still happens today when we use up resources too fast. During the late Neolithic age, people made more technological advances. Tool makers created better farming tools as the need for them arose. These included hoes for digging soil, sickles, that's that curved knife for cutting grain, and millstones for grinding flour. So guys, millstones are big rocks that are kind of rough, and so I would dump my wheat in there and I would smash those rocks together, and then I would spin those rocks and that would churn the wheat into flour. This is what happened to Samson. Back in the day, they would make huge things that they would spin around in a circle, make an animal do that, and when the Philistines conquered Samson, they made him turn the flour mill. So those are millstones. In the Middle Ages, we made the windmills do that stuff to get those things, but you have to turn it into flour. In some regions, people began to work with metals, including copper. Workers heated rocks and discovered melted copper inside them. They then experimented with making the copper into tools and weapons. These proved to be easier to make and use than those made of stone. Craftspeople in Western Asia discovered that mixing copper and tin formed bronze. This was a technological breakthrough because bronze was stronger than copper. Bronze became widely used between 3000 and 1200 BC. This period is known as the Bronze Age. Few people, however, could afford bronze and continue to use tools and weapons made of stone. So guys, we have the Bronze Age. The Metal, the Iron Age, all those things have huge things. What they learned is if I can get these resources out of it, I can form a mold. Then I dump liquid into the mold and instantly I have an arrowhead. Dump liquid into the mold again, another arrowhead. We could mass produce arrowheads, spearheads, knives, sickles, digging tools, you name it, they could do that, guys. And then they said, hey, the copper is cool, but copper is a little bit too soft. In other words, guys, we use copper today in our wiring. Why do I make copper out of wire? For two reasons. One, it conducts electricity, but two, it's bendable. And so I don't really want to make a weapon out of something that can bend. So they started mixing it with other ones, and you get bronze, stronger than copper. So we constantly are trying to improve it. Huge change in history as we start to work with metals, done early on in biblical times, guys. So please understand that. Awesome. Okay, humans continue to develop more complex cultures or ways of life. By the beginning of the Bronze Age, communities were widespread. More complex cultures called civilizations began to develop in these communities. 4 of the Great River civilizations, here they come. You might want to highlight this, guys. It's going to be definitely a question on your test to know the Great River civilizations. They are Mesopotamia. You're going to learn that that's the Israelites, guys. Egypt, India, and China emerged around 3000 BC. Those are going to be the next ones we study in your history books. Not quite in that perfect order, but these are the big ones. Mesopotamia has the Tigris and Euphrates River. Egypt has the Nile River. India has the the Indus River, sorry. And China has 2 rivers, the Long River and the Yellow River, that had big civilizations. Okay? All civilizations share similar characteristics. We're going to go through those characteristics, guys. They're in red for you. Also on your history test, I'm going to say, what are the characteristics that all civilizations have? One characteristic, they have cities and government. Second characteristic, they have religion. Third characteristic, they have social structure. Fourth characteristic, they have writing and art. So maybe over here on your notes, you want to write down the number 1, 2, 3, 4 as we get to those things. Maybe you want to just on your notes down here say characteristics of a civilization and write those 4 red terms. You do whatever best for you. Just make sure you're ready for that on your test, okay? Let's get and study each one of those characteristics. One characteristic of these early civilizations was that they developed cities and they had to form governments. The first civilizations developed in river valleys where fertile land made it easy to grow crops and feed large numbers of people. The rivers provided fish and water. They also encouraged trade, which allowed the exchange of both goods and ideas. The cities that developed in these valleys became the centers of civilization. So I like to encourage 6th graders to understand how history works. It worked like this. Number 1, we had to have agriculture. You had to produce enough food. Once I produced enough food, I had what we call a surplus, too much food. Surplus leads to specialization. You can do other tasks because there's a surplus of food. Specialization leads to trade. You trade those products around. Trade, guys, lets you settle in one place and develop into a civilization. So because there's enough food, we have enough people staying in one place. As soon as we have enough people staying in one place, we develop a city. That leads to a civilization. A civilization is going to have number 1, cities, and number 2, a government. So you have developed cities and formed governments here. Let's talk about that government. Number 8 is coming up in this paragraph. People formed governments to protect themselves and their food supplies. In these early civilizations, the first government were monarchies. What's a monarchy? It's a type of government led by a king or queen. Monarchs is the Latin word mono. Mono means one, guys. So this is a rule by one. Monarchs created armies to defend against enemies and made laws to keep order. They also appointed government officials who managed food supplies and building projects. So eventually we developed a king, and the king ruled over the people, and the people said, tell us what to do. And he said, we need to build walls. I'll lead the army into war to protect you. We need to build a canal so we have water. We need to build these storehouses. In Egypt, they built the pyramids. Those were monarchies. Those were kings telling them what to do, and people held them in high regard. So number 1, cities and government. Number 2 characteristic, you had to have a religion. Religion emerged in new civilizations to help people explain their lives. And it's a little misleading, guys, because what it really did is it did this. I'll just read it over here. For example, religions help explain the forces of nature and the roles of humans in the world. So anytime somebody would say, why did it flood? The God. Why was there fire? The gods. What's lightning? Gods. Anything they couldn't explain, they just went back and said, it's a religion. So then they learned to start to honor these gods. Early people believed that gods were responsible for a community's survival. Priests performed religious ceremonies to try to win the support of the gods. Rulers claimed that their own power was based on the approval of their gods. Now, guys, that's pretty good. That's smart to do logically. I say that God wants me to rule. You won't mess with me, or God's going to mess with the city. And so we have the other fill in the blank here. Early people believed that gods were responsible for a community's survival. And so if life is going good, I'm going, hey, the gods like us. And as soon as life goes bad, I go, man, what did you people do that made God angry? We got to figure that out. And so we got to offer more sacrifices, or we have to do this, or we have to do that. And so they just used religion as a way to explain things that were out of the people's control. Religion number 2, social structure. Number 3, early civilizations had social class structures. That is, people in society were organized into groups. These groups were defined by the type of work people did and the amount of wealth and power they had. Guys, that is true of every civilization. Even in America today, you'll hear the political ads. I care about the middle class. Let's tax the upper class. Let's help out the lower class. So in America, we like to divide us into three classes: upper, middle, and lower class. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Every civilization had it. The farther up you are, the more money and power you had. So here comes the social classes in general. Rulers, priests, government officials, and warriors made up the highest social class. Lots of times we draw social classes as pyramids, so we say a social pyramid. The reason we make it in the shape of a triangle, guys, is because the upper class, there's not that many of them. The middle class, there's more of them, and then the lower class, the bottom of the pyramid, is the widest. It has the most people in it. So priests, government officials, this is, if I'm drawing a triangle, this is the top of the triangle. It's class 1, class 2, class 3. It had 3 social classes. So be able to draw your social pyramid, guys, or your social structure. Okay, what else did this high class do? They set up the rules and made important decisions. Below this class was the middle class. It was a large group of free people. It included farmers, artisans, make things, craftspeople, make things. And we'll talk later on about merchants. They sell the things. At the bottom of the class structure were enslaved people. Where did these come from? Most of whom were captured from enemies during war. So guys, we're going to talk about slaves a lot in history, and we just need to take it in strides. We talk about slaves a lot in the Bible, and when you read slavery in the Bible, guys, God never says it's wrong. Slavery was just a way of life. And today we think of slavery as wrong because we're doing it against the people's will. We enslave them. And today, a lot of times in America, when we think of slavery, we think of it as a race thing. Back in the day, it was not a race thing. My village ran out of food, I attacked your village. And we just knew when we go to war, if I beat you, you become my slave. It had nothing to do with your race. We were pretty much the same ethnicity. It's just you lost the war and off you went as a captured person. Slavery also wasn't that big of a deal back in the day, guys, for another reason. Wealth was for the few. They were for these powerful people. Most people were down here. They didn't have wealth. Their goal was stay alive. And if I had a slave, I wanted that slave to stay alive so that he could do the work for me. So life didn't change too much when people were conquered and went from one group to another. In fact, sometimes life got better. We'll read that in history. You have an example of that in the Bible. The Babylonians come in and wallop Israel. They carry them off into the Babylonian captivity. Eventually they're freed, and half the Israelites stay in Babylon. I don't want to go home. Life's better here. I'd rather be a slave in Babylon than a free person in Israel. So keep that stuff in mind, guys, where slaves came from, just so that we do not put 2020 views on what we're studying in ancient history. Number 3, characteristic of a civilization. It has a social structure. Number 4, it has writing and art. To pass on information, people invented ways of writing. These early systems used symbols in place of letters and words. We'll talk about that with some of the civilizations. Writing became an important feature of these new civilizations. People used writing to keep accurate records and, thank goodness, to preserve their stories. So this is how we start to learn about history. But the biggest thing, guys, to keep accurate records. I sold you this. You owe me this. Those kind of things. Civilizations also created art for, one reason was straight up enjoyment, guys. The other one was practical purposes. Artists created paintings and sculptures portraying gods. That would be practical purpose, so I can worship, and forces of nature. People designed massive buildings that just served as places of worship or burial tombs for kings. So massive buildings, burials for kings would jump to the pyramids, guys. But you got to understand, some of it was definitely done just straight up for enjoyment, to work our way through those things, to be able to understand them. Okay? If you're on these links online, guys, after the video, you feel free to watch these videos on how we started to melt the rocks and make things with this. Here's some of the craftspeople and what they could make, showing the work that came out of it. And then here are your 4 major river civilizations. So China, the map is really distorted, guys, as far as the shape is concerned, when they put that flat map on there, okay? All right, that brings us to the end of lesson 2, so you'll have the other worksheet that goes along with your notes today, and because there's only 2 lessons in chapter 3, tomorrow you'll have a test in history taken on chapter 3. Feel free to use these notes from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to help you with it. I told you a few times in this video how the 4 characteristics were going to be on your test, the 4 civilizations are going to be on your test. Feel free to look at your book, but feel free to have your answers right here in your notes to help you with that. Blessings on your assignment and on the test tomorrow.